Kia ora, ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to Citizen A, where we wrap the week's current affairs with the best political team on television from a very Auckland perspective. Warning, we're as fair and balanced as Fox News. Joining me tonight, I'm a revolving panel of bloggers and Auckland opinion shapers. He runs the best independent news site in New Zealand, providing journalists too left-wing for gainful employment a means to pay the bills. He makes Mark Sainsbury look like, well, Mark Sainsbury, editor of scoop.co.nz, the ever-brilliant Selwyn Manning, and here's the Darth Vader of the blogosphere, minus the moment of redemption at the end, meaning he's pure evil. Right-wing storm blogger Cameron Slater, welcome to you both. Coming up tonight, issue 1, it's been a week since the quake. How has the government responded? And was John Campbell right to attack Moon Man King Ring? Issue 2, Simon Power, the fourth most powerful Lord of the Sith, decides to step down for Parliament at the election. Pushed or shoved. Issue 3 tonight, the Māori Party are currently trying to sell their foreshore and seabed legislation to Māori electorates around the country. Was Hone right? And is the Māori Party confusing mana enhancement for Stockholm Syndrome? And we'll end the show on a final word. But let's kick things off with issue 1. It's been a sobering week as the full impact of the quake has hit home, with the wider ramifications to those living in Christchurch and the rest of the economy are starting to become more and more apparent. Has the government's response been good enough? Selwyn, how does tripling the EQC levies rebuild Christchurch when much of the damage won't be covered by the EQC?
Yeah, the government's got itself into an ideological hole, I believe, over this whole thing. I think, you know, that the call for a levy that is targeted outside the earthquake fund is the prudent way to go. It is very, very difficult, obviously, to do an extra tax, and you know that's a broad base. But targeted, there's a lot of sense to that, and you can see all the other parties, with the exception of ACT and National, are actually warm to that idea. If they're wanting if they're wanting a collegial approach and to engage the whole of this country, then a levy is the way to go. It works in Australia. Why not here?
How does the EQC actually pay for all of this damage, though, from simply tripling the levies?
Well, you know, I don't really understand the question too much, but from the point of view of distribution, what is needed is hard cash, particularly in the rebuilding phase, or in those areas that are going to cost relating to engineer assessments of where rebuilding should take place. You know, all of those areas, this is where the funds would come from, a centrally controlled thing. My concerns is that we've got a government in some ways, and this is an example of it, that does not want to govern. There's an expression of goodwill right across this country to actually, for everyone to pitch in. No, that is. And the government is not actually moving to centralise that and do it by way of a levy.
We're only a week and 2 days into it.
Is it that bloated public service that National were boasting cutting back a month ago that is currently saving lives in Christchurch?
See, this is the argument that the left has been running basically since day one, politicising this whole disaster.
Asking questions isn't politicising,
no,
Cam. Come on, let's not
questions
use the earthquake as a chance.
Asking questions isn't politicising. But when you're pointing the finger and laying a whole lot of blame and saying that this hasn't happened and that hasn't happened, and it's all because John Key eats babies, is frank. And I'm not saying you are, but there are some sites out there that are just really doing.
I think we live in a democracy, and it's a healthy thing to put ideas in.
Let's not question.
You've all read Grant Robertson's lines this morning, and I have no issue with.
I haven't actually.
No issue with people that are trying to propose solutions, but so far we've had Phil Goff, who said no, we can't do this and we can't do that and we can't do that, and it's just a whole lot of can'ts, and we know what we think about people who have got a whole lot of can'ts.
To be frank, Phil Goff has not had a lot of coverage over this whole affair,
and rightly so.
The ideas are coming from a prudent, pragmatic point of view.
Or Russell Norman.
No.
You know, 3 days before we even knew what the extent of the damage was.
There are some people in this country, with yourself excluded, that do not follow politicians into such debates. Yeah. But this kind of issue relating to a levy has a lot of common sense to it.
The simple fact is, Bomber and Selwyn, is that this country is broke, and we've now got a broken country as well. And and we cannot keep borrowing money on a week-by-week basis.
It'll be good
to fund welfare for people who don't need it when there's the need to have welfare for people who do need it in Christchurch.
This is going to be the excuse that the right wing use, right? It's that they are pushing their agenda, which, let's be honest, all of the things that they've suggested they'd cut back on, they were pushing before the earthquake. The earthquake gives them the perfect excuse, doesn't it?
In times like this, it is never really sensible to actually make huge fundamental decisions to this makeup of the New Zealand society. Tampering with working for families' funds is
but
folly.
No decisions have been made. There's
no,
a whole
but
lot of
it's been
assumptions.
the public has been desensitised to this
flying
idea.
kites. They're flying kites.
But just the
flying
same way
kites.
Russell Norman is flying kites for levies. It's
Okay,
an idea. Let's put it on the table.
It's an idea that John
discuss
Key
it.
put out there in the first instance.
So, and why shouldn't the most wealthy in New Zealand, the only ones who've benefited from Key's tax cuts, face
That's
a
not
levy
true.
like the one the Greens have proposed to rebuild Christchurch? Why shouldn't they?
Well, I think it's a means of engaging all New Zealanders.
Well, it doesn't.
I can see the progressive taxation kind of ideas kicking in from the Greens at a fairly high threshold.
Yep.
I don't agree with that.
50,000
I think on a percentage basis we can apply a levy right across the board here so that every New Zealander feels like they are contributing to the recovery of this. It's a national disaster and we all want to assist Christchurch in this regard.
Isn't asking for international aid by smiling and waving on Letterman and Oprah a bit stink when our wealthiest haven't been levied and haven't been asked to pay for more? And let's be honest, that international aid, hold on, that international aid is needed in other places far less developed than New Zealand, surely.
We pretend that we're a first world country. We're not. We're second
there are
level.
Signs that that's the case.
Right,
yeah.
right. This is the cold hard reality of the fact. When there's emergencies, international aid is offered. I don't believe there's any issues that we've got there. I agree with what Selwyn is saying, is that all New Zealanders need to be taken into account when it comes to helping out the people of Christchurch. But to say that that the wealthiest aren't paying their way when the top 10% of taxpayers pay 75% of the tax take is just a lie.
But it's not going to come out of the tax take. The recovery is not coming out of there. We're talking about a specific issue.
That's right, but that's going to increase.
We need to focus on that.
But here's the thing. You mentioned it in your question there about tax cuts for the wealthy, which is the nice cry from the left.
Yeah.
If those are not valid, if we can't afford those, then so too does Labour's policies on GST being removed from fruit and vegetables. So too does the first 5,000.
But those aid people who are needing that help right now.
Labour promised
there's
$5 billion worth of additional expenditure in the first 2 months of this year.
That's right.
Something Cam said really rings true, that there are signs that New
national.
Zealand is broken and that we are not in the same standards as some of those most advanced developed countries. When you have a government that isn't able to actually respond faster than what Red Cross has, that Red Cross on the back of cash donations from the country,
and we're seeing this in every country in the world,
is the one
including
that's
the United
actually dishing
States.
it out in a big way down
Look
there.
at the
then you've got to
response to
realise
Katrina.
that
we don't want to compare ourselves to them, do we?
The other thing too, that a disaster like this demonstrates the necessity of a centrally evolved organisation,
big government
to deliver and to work it out. And even your mates in the National Party agreed with that by making it a national disaster.
Question to both of you. John Campbell, hold on. Question to both of you. John Campbell was criticised for his roasting of Moon Man Ken Ring's moon earthquake prophecies. Was John wrong, and can Ken Ring predict earthquakes?
I can probably predict earthquakes.
Yeah.
John Campbell clearly was probably suffering a day of traumatic stress disorder. And I noticed that 24 hours later he very promptly apologises to the guy. It was poor form, clearly. And I think other people and commentators like Brian Edwards kind of exposed it and articulated it reasonably well.
But this guy can't actually predict earthquakes, can he?
Well, what the problems are, that people that actually present some sort of alternative to fact-based methodologies are always going to come under criticisms like this. And really, you've got to wonder where the attention came from on this particular issue.
I don't think
was Campbell out of line?
Look, I don't watch Campbell. I find his pontificating nauseous at the best of times. Was he wrong to smack up Ken Ring? Well, he could have smacked him up in a whole lot more clever way that wouldn't have attracted. And and Peter Creswell pointed that out on his blog. Why don't you just let the moonbat speak, and so we can all. Everyone suspects he's a moonbat. Letting him speak and tell us his theories will just prove the point.
To both of you, TV3's Patrick Gower, who last month breathlessly reported that Hone Harawira was really after the leadership of the Māori Party, has now predicted John Key will win the election because of the earthquake. Yet, as blogger Peter Hyde pointed out this week, Christchurch is a divided refugee city in the eastern suburbs. Is Patrick Gower as good a prophet as Ken Ring?
I've got a lot of respect for Patrick. A lot of respect for him from his work at the New Zealand Herald, and certainly when he's arrived into the broadcast medium. But nobody can predict the outcomes at the moment, especially when all the balls are up in the air. Now we know Christchurch politically has been a divided city for quite a time. You've got your lines of national support and your old money support, and you've got your other more lower socioeconomic regions. But to point out at this stage whether or not there's going to be benefits for John Key is too early. We can see, though, however, overseas evidence that when somebody is a leader through a crisis that they accrue extra support. But I think a lot of that could be placed on Bob Parker at the moment.
Right.
I think
well, I would just be thankful that Jim Anderton wasn't the mayor in Christchurch. I mean, he keeps getting elected by the congenitally impaired in his electorate. But I just don't think he would have coped at all well with what's needed in a crisis like this is someone fronting and showing a bit of gravitas.
I cannot believe after you did that dirty, filthy job on Jim Anderton that you are even mouthing those words. Your audacity astounds me. Question to both of you. Who wins, who loses from the government's response so far?
Well, I don't think anyone is winning yet. There needs to be some cohesive, clear and stable leadership, and I am not seeing that from the National Party. We saw Jerry Brownlee appointed once again as the main man on this. We haven't seen him since that day. We have seen cabinet ministers announcing that they're leaving in the same on day 8 of this Christchurch dilemma. I don't see any satisfactory plan. Ironically, and I mean it in the strongest sense, Paula Bennett, as Social Welfare Minister, appears to be the one that's actually delivering to the people in Christchurch the most.
She's the one who can deliver them immediately in terms of those sorts of things. But I mean, obviously you weren't watching...
I'll tell you what I was watching, Cam. I was watching the Prime Minister, John Key, 2 days after that earthquake disaster occurred, on a YouTube video that he produced, standing outside his beehive office on his balcony saying how wonderful the view was. And then it took about 2 minutes before he got into the crisis of Christchurch. That is not leadership material.
That's true. That's a very valid criticism. Come on.
You saw what, do you want him down there?
No, you saw it, Cam.
No, I didn't see it. I haven't
well,
seen
you need to see it before you comment. Have a good look.
You haven't seen his YouTube clip?
No, I'm not a big fan of him like you guys are.
Moving on. Thank God you're unbelievable. Thank you, panel. Issue 2. Simon Power, the 4th most powerful Lord of the Sith, decides to step down from Parliament at the election. Pushed or shoved. Selwyn, who willingly walks away from political power?
Simon Power. Cam will be able to enlighten us on the reasons. He's got the ear of the innards of the National Party on this one. But generally, this really exposes those soft conservatives in the National Party around Bill English's lot to a faction shift. The power is leaving that area. With Simon Power pulling out of that, you've got the more extreme ideologues on the right side of National that once would have aligned themselves to ACT actually advancing in their popularity.
You are the National Party narc. What is the word?
Just to address something that Selwyn said there about those factions, that's somewhat true, and it's probably a small factor in Simon Power wanting to leave.
Okay, what's the word?
He would have done the numbers and worked out that faction is now 2, but it's now 1. It was Bill English and Simon Power. He's right in the fact that they were quickly evaporating and losing friends, and Simon Power's probably accepted the thinking along the lines of what Anne Herkes did when she left Parliament. It's good to go out and have some friends that can help me when I'm on the outside, rather than to go out in a bowl of spite and not have any friends. That said, my understanding is of Simon's situation is somewhat tragic. He's known for some time that his father was very ill, and he's been undertaking Institute of Directors exams and things like that. I heard just this morning that Simon Power's father had died last night, and that's probably the overriding reason as to why he's left politics. He's looked at it and said, if I carry on and do what I want to do, and he's always been the pretender to be the leader of the National Party, if he does that, he's got 20, 30 years of not seeing his 2 children grow up. And when you get a family tragedy like that, it brings it home that as to what your importance that things are in life. And I know he just loves his 2 kids absolutely more than anything else. And I think that's just sheeted at home. And he's known for a couple of months, and so he's been preparing for that situation.
Selwyn, Power is overseeing the most radical dismantling of our legal rights ever witnessed in New Zealand by limiting jury trials, desensitised trial by TV screens, and no independent legal aid. New Zealanders who care about civil liberties will be popping the champagne corks this week, won't they?
Well, I'd say that they shouldn't do that, that they need to be concerned that Simon Power has been instrumental in actually setting up legislative reform in this area, and from his own words and his own admission, he's not necessarily that talented in seeing them through once they're all established. So I would imagine that they will put somebody in there to manage, to govern those portfolios that can actually advance this more in this particular party's favour.
Cam, will Simon be working next in the private prison industry or any of the energy companies he's about to privatise?
Not that I know of. As far as I know, he's going to take over his father's share broking business.
Who wins, who loses by Simon standing down? Judith Collins surely wins, does she not?
I think those that voted for National Party from a point of view of conservatism and centrist policies, they're the losers in this, because you'll see a National Party advancing in the next term into those where the likes of Stephen Joyce, and he's a competent minister for sure, but those ideologies that surround him and who those that he represents will position more into a striking position, if you like. So if John Key goes, I think the New Zealand Herald's analyst and commentator John Armstrong is absolutely right. That Stephen Joyce is your man.
Who wins, who loses by Simon Power standing down?
Interesting comments about Stephen Joyce. I think he will pick up the state-owned enterprises portfolio. He's got expertise in that. After all, he clapped out old state-owned radio stations and made a personal fortune out of it. So he's got some expertise in that area. I'm hearing that Sam Lotuinga may pick up something to do around the commerce or associate justice. And I'm not sure yet, although it does seem to be opinion forming from the people I've spoken to that Judith Collins may actually take over justice.
Wow, that
Well,
just made me shiver.
She used to be the president of the Auckland District Law Society, so she's perhaps more qualified than Simon Power actually was.
She's in that frame of justice.
She's in that frame of justice. That's a very good way of putting it. Thank you, panel. Coming up, the Māori Party explained to their incredulous supporters how the foreshore and seabed legislation isn't Whitey winning again. Citizen A is back after the break. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is Citizen A. We're reviewing the week with Scoop editor Selwyn Manning and perpetual right-wing candidate Cameron Slater. Issue 3 this week. They don't call it the foreshore and seabed legislation any longer. I think Minister Finlayson's favourite spin doctor Ben Thomas had it renamed the Coastal Seabird Revitalisation and Pakeha Marine Welfare Consultation Bill. But no matter how they spin it, it's Whitey and his corporate oil and mining buddies who win. Selwyn, let's be brutally honest about this foreshore and seabed land confiscation. Most white folk in this country are under the delusion that it's about their free access to the beach, aren't they?
Yep, I think that they feel that they're about to lose some sort of right.
Yep. Who's they? I reckon it's
they,
about 5% of the population.
You know, we get a generalised question, you get a generalised answer. But I think, you know, this whole thing, the National Party has gone quite quiet, really, on trying to actually sell this.
Yep.
And I think that quietness is actually one of the strategies.
Right.
If it stays out of the severe, if you like, well, then it sees it as an advantage, I think, strategically. What the Māori Party has got to do, and it seems to me to be an impossible task, is to convince its electorate that this is a good deal.
Yeah. Cam, the far-right coastal coalition, some who think that Vikings settled New Zealand before the Māori, right? are vocal in their attacks
Ken
on this
Ring fans.
legislation.
King Ring fans.
Yeah, that's right. Will they be wooed by New Zealand First's policy to nationalise the seabed and foreshore? How worried should National be from a revolt from their own voters?
I don't think National's worried about a revolt from their own voters. I actually don't think that the vast majority of New Zealanders give two hoots about the whole situation. We've just come through summer. There weren't any shotguns presented by rabid Maoris with moku.
And that was under the old legislation. So
and that's under the old legislation. So changing is going to make theoretically that better. My position has always been the same, and it's still the same. And I cannot understand why National just doesn't say, let's go back to the way it was before and let the courts deal with it. And that's what the Maori Party wanted.
The key to this is the Māori constituency. And it seems to me that looking at this new legislation, it's like a big rock and roll swindle.
No, it's a bugger's muddle.
And blocking out people in contemporary times from being able to actually claim here seems to me to be an abhorrence.
Well,
I can't see that.
And it's unusual
why
for a
Māori
pinko
would go
like
with
you
it.
to
I
actually
think
argue for private property
is
rights.
actually on the money with this. And I think he knows his constituencies
don't think he
better
does.
than perhaps those conservative iwi kind of leadership type representatives.
Well, now that's the key thing. You talk about Whitey and his corporate greed for oil and all that. It's actually not
corporate iwi.
It's corporate iwi, not corporate Whitey that is wanting this deal, because they're the ones who want to have the farms and the mussel farms and the parlour farms and the aquaculture.
And the argument is like Margaret Thatcher's theory that the wealth will trickle down.
Right.
Now we haven't seen that.
And it's not
Hone was right when he criticised this bill, wasn't he? This is still a mass land confiscation of Māori land dressed up as a beach access issue, which the Māori Party have rolled over for.
It's private property rights conversation.
Maybe I'm in the dark on this, but I always thought that the legislation was designed to put right the aspects of recourse to the law for Māori people.
But it hasn't been, has it?
It is tampered with it, but it has not resolved that problem. And in fact, it actually enshrines in legislation a block. It puts a fence around many from being able to actually
And for me, that's offensive as well. I think just go back to the way it was and just be done with it.
Why can't the minister approve a negotiated settlement when it comes to a Māori claim, yet the minister does have the power to approve freehold title for reclaimed land under Section 245 of the Resource Management Act? It's a racist double standard, isn't it?
I think it is, and I still agree with the original Maori Party proposal of repeal and go back to the way it was and let the courts deal with it. I mean, why do we have a court system if we're not going to trust the judges and trust the justice system to look at all evidence and then apply the law equally to everybody?
Question to both of you. Isn't it true that all this legislation will do is legitimise all the mining and drilling the Crown are planning on the foreshore and seabed and lock into place the confiscation of Māori land?
I think you've honed in on exactly a concern
for the
here.
benefit of the iwi elite.
It does provide an avenue for that to occur.
Right.
You know, we saw the government here try to do that to state-owned land, the conservation blocks. It was the public outcry was huge. Obviously, it backs off that and it thinks, we will actually try and stimulate some sort of a positive response from our iwi mates.
Right.
And
so
that's exactly what it is.
It is a smart politics by
But it doesn't win elections like that.
The thing is that in terms of the foreshore and seabed, we've had an earthquake. People are focused on that. They're not really, don't really care. So we're not going to go near the beach now for another 6 months. It's winter and all of that. But what you're seeing is the influence of the Maori leadership group. Right. That secret group of people that are sitting there advising the government behind closed doors for the Maoritocracy, essentially. The very constituency of the majority of the Maori Party, with the exception of Hone Harawira, whose constituency is the indigent brown in the north.
I think the Māori Party has placed itself in a very, very dire situation on this. I think it is now relying on whether or not members of its constituencies are still satisfied with their iwi leaders. As soon as a division occurs there, then the Māori Party is at risk of losing its support base in that prized area across to Labour again.
Who wins, who loses here?
Well, I think that all New Zealanders lose with the abrogation of private property rights, and I just think we should go back to the way it was, and that applies equally to Maori as much as it does to every other owner of coastal property, that they should be allowed to have redress through the courts. and until we can actually apply that rule of law, I mean, Helen Clark made an appalling decision.
Yep.
Cullen as well.
And
Cullen made an appalling decision. They panicked, and they jammed in a law that on all basis, from anybody from left or right, it doesn't matter, have to be appalled at that decision. And I still don't see why National is trying to go for a halfway house instead of just repealing it.
Who wins, who loses?
I think we lose big time from 2 points. One, from the point of view of having proper recourse or prudent recourse to justice on these issues. The other thing is we are losing money out of this. This legislative agenda that has been running all this term has wasted millions of dollars. And it's not stopping here. You know, the next term we'll probably see it being tampered with again if the dice is fall in a different way.
Let's wrap the show with last word. Selwyn, your last word this week is?
What I'd really like to see is to see this government actually assuming strong leadership, where it actually presents a cabinet that is actually able to coordinate without irritations or without diversions to address the needs in Christchurch. It is a huge body of goodwill for by far a huge majority of New Zealanders to contribute to this. The government needs to wake up, abandon its ideology things, and be pragmatic about delivering a proper platform for Christchurch.
Cam, your final word this week is?
In some respects, I agree with Selwyn on that, about abandoning ideology, and the left also needs to abandon ideology that the only solution is to jack taxes up. You know, if Phil Goff is correct, and the tax cuts for the rich, as he likes to call it, are too expensive and we need to abandon those to help pay for Christchurch, then likewise his promises of the tax-free $5,000 and the GST coming off GST are also not sustainable. Labor in the first 2 months of this year has promised an additional $5 billion worth of election bribes. If the tax cuts for the rich are unaffordable, then so are Labour's bribes of the $5 billion. We all need to contribute to this.
Thank you, Selwyn. Thank you, Cam. Ladies and gentlemen, to my final word. The government's desire to slash interest-free student loans and working for families to pay for the Christchurch rebuild is as counterproductive as a Charlie Sheen guide to family counselling or a Colonel Gaddafi human rights festival. Interest-free student loans are interest-free if the student stays in New Zealand. We bitch all the way to the bank about New Zealand graduates leaving New Zealand. Interest-free loans are our one method of keeping them, and the slashing of working for families for the rich is an illusion. Back in 2008, Bill English himself said that those receiving working for families on over $100,000 were costing $1.1 million. Coming up with $1.1 million when you're looking for $5 billion is like Charlie Sheen offering not to smoke crack at the breakfast table as a viable 12-step program to sobriety. The government are looking for excuses to slash public welfare. They are not coming up with solutions to rebuild Christchurch. If you like tonight's show, please join our Citizen A Facebook site and connect with other like-minded news citizens, and follow me on my Citizen Bomber Twitter and Citizen Bomber Facebook page. Thanks for watching, whānau. Good night, Aotearoa.
Supporting local content so you can see more of New Zealand on air.